We're still in circuit breaker mode here in Singapore. Can't be too safe. Got to use the sanitizer all the time. So I want to welcome you here to the second course in basic project management skills about risk management. This is a very important part of project management because no matter how well you plan, things will not turn out the way you planned them to. So we need to think about what might happen. Now, if we go for the definition of risk in the Project Management Body of Knowledge, the PMBOK, published by the Project Management Institute, they say that it's an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on a project's objectives. Now, it's interesting that we talk about both positive and negative risk. There can be good risk. A lot of people don't understand this concept and they think that risk is always something bad. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. We also have, when we talk about risk, that we have to think about risk being magnitude dependent. The greater the payoff, the more risk that we find acceptable, and the higher the impact should a risk event occur, we would say that it becomes a more significant risk. Think about risk as being both coming from internal and external sources to our project. What do we look at when we look at risk? I like to say that risk is as easy as pie. We want to look at the probability, the impact, and the event. And we can classify the probability and the impact on a scale of low to high. And we can say that the ones that we want to be most concerned about are going to be those that we define as having the highest probability of occurrence and the highest impact. And those that we need to be least concerned about, obviously the lowest impact, the lowest probability. And we can almost draw isobars in between there, between those, and say low, medium, high types of risks. And we can use this to our advantage. So risk is always situational. There's no textbook answer to dealing with risk. And we have to consider the risk for each project because each project is unique and therefore the risks are going to be different. However, we can leverage lessons learned from past projects to help us, to guide us with dealing with risk. We can either look at what went wrong and how we could prevent that from happening again, or we can say, what were we worried about? Maybe it didn't happen, but it's still possible that it might happen again. And so we can use this information when we're thinking about risk for our project. So we can talk about risk in terms of two types of risk. We can talk about business risk, and this, all businesses face risk. And this could either be gain or loss, good risk or bad risk. Now, many people, when they talk about risk, really are only talking about what's known as pure or insurable risk, and this is only an opportunity for loss, right? Something can go wrong. You could get in a car accident, you could have a flood, you could have a fire, your baggage could be lost on your next trip. Good luck on that. And so these are the different types of risk, but we really need to make sure that we're thinking about business risk, both positive as well as negative. We can talk about known risks, those that we can identify on our team, within our organization, as being potentially something that will impact our project. And unknown risks, just because we didn't identify them, doesn't mean they're not there. I like to sometimes think about risks like an animal that lives in the swamps down in Florida and around the Gulf of Mexico. Anybody know what this is? It's not a crocodile, it's a cousin of the crocodile, it's an alligator. And there's an old saying down south, It ain't the gator you see that's gonna bite you. And unknown risks are much like alligators in the swamp. If we can spot them, oh, there's an alligator. Oh, there's an alligator over there. Oh, there's an alligator. Those aren't the ones that are gonna cause you trouble. It's the one you don't see that's gonna come up behind you and bite you on the butt. So, as we said, good risks and bad risks. In project management terms, risk management terms, we call these threats and opportunities. So a good risk would be beneficial to our objectives, and we call this an opportunity. A bad risk, the impact would be detrimental to our project objectives. We call these threats. And in some situations, you can have a potential for both a threat and an opportunity. And we have to be aware of that. It can even be a two-edged sword. So when we're thinking about, let's say, a schedule or a cost element in our project, how bad could it get? Could something go twice as long as we expect it to? Not a problem. Could it go 3 times as long? Could it cost twice as much or 3 times as much? Sometimes that happens. But what do you think about it only, instead of taking 10 days, we can do it in 5 or we can do it in 3? Is that much more likely? Probably not. So potentially there's going to be more threat than opportunity on our project. What does that mean? That means we've got to be aware of those opportunities, because if we miss them and aren't able to capture them, what's going to happen? We're not going to be able to recover. I'll tell you a little story. One day when my son and I were walking down the street, when he was a young boy, like me, he was never a small boy. Now he's about like this, but that's another story. But he was a young boy, and we were walking down the street, and all of a sudden he's there. He's not next to me. I turn around, and he's standing there, and he's going, Dad, come here. And I said, what? And so I walked over, and he lifted up his foot, and there was a $50 bill. I had missed that opportunity. He hadn't. He had captured it. And so if you're not aware, if you're not ready to capture opportunities, you could miss them. So let's talk about the risk management process, the steps in risk management, right? So first thing we have to do is plan for the risk management, decide what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, who's going to do it. And then, of course, we have to identify the risk. And then once we've identified risks, we have to do analysis. And we can do both qualitative analysis, as I showed you earlier, low, medium, high, or we can do quantitative analysis where we can put in dollar amounts and probabilities in terms of percentage of likelihood of occurrence. That's much more difficult. Major oil companies, NASA, people like that, yes, they do that. You got to have a lot of data, you've got to have a lot of experience. It may not be worth it. But if we can just judge one risk against each other, use a qualitative analysis, that helps us, because what we want to do really with the analysis is to prioritize them. And why do we want to prioritize them? Because we don't have enough time and effort to deal with every single risk that we think of. And so when we do our risk response planning, we want to deal with the most important ones, whether it's the top 10, the top 20, whatever we've decided in our risk planning stage is how we're going to deal with risk. How much time, how much effort, resources, of course, to deal with the risk. And so we come up with our response plans, and then of course we have to put them into play. We may have to modify our basic project plan for some of the responses, and other responses only if and when a risk occurs, then we put them into play. And of course the monitoring and controlling then as they occur, Did it work? Do we have to do anything else? Is that risk passed? Can we go on and look at something else? So let's talk first about risk identification. And one of the things that we want to do here is not just everybody sit down and start thinking about, oh, well, what could go wrong, what could go wrong. We really want to have some guidelines. And a useful thing to do is to have risk categories. So it helps us and our team to focus on where the potential risks may lie. A very generic breakdown here, internal and external, and then we can break down the external to unpredictable or predictable. The internal ones we could perhaps look at technical, schedule, legal, financial. There's any number of ways that you might want to look at it. It really depends on your industry. And if you go online, you can find a lot of these breakdown structures, risk breakdown structure, just like our work breakdown structure, our WBS. There is such a thing as a risk breakdown structure, but it's more like a guideline rather than a detailed way of working. But they can be very useful to have. So when we've decided, okay, we're going to focus on a particular area, and then when we talk about risk, we have to describe the risk event in a way that it's understood. And really using something like this meta language, where we say, we talk about the cause, the event, and the consequence. The language would be if, then, resulting in. Far too often I've seen projects where, the risk is described as bad weather. Well, what does that mean? What does bad weather mean? I grew up in the northeastern United States. I lived in Ohio before I moved to Singapore. Bad weather, snow, right? In Ohio, actually sometimes even tornadoes. On the East Coast where I lived in New Jersey, hurricanes occasionally. Here in Singapore where I live now, no. We really don't have bad weather. We have pretty bland weather. It's always the same. As we like to say here, two kinds of weather, hot and humid. Sometimes it rains and sometimes it doesn't. I've lived and worked in the Middle East where we can have sandstorms. You can have, I've been in earthquakes in Indonesia and Taiwan. Whether that's weather or a geological condition, but the point is, bad weather is not a very complete description. So you could say, if we have a blizzard, and I was just watching the news earlier today, they're expecting a blizzard to hit the northern states in the U.S., the northeastern states, this first week of May. Record low temperatures and snowstorms of several inches to over a foot in parts of the northeast United States. So yeah, if we have a blizzard in May, then there could be excessive snow and people won't be ready for it, resulting in traffic accidents and serious delays. Well, nobody's commuting with the virus, so, but you get the idea. So you can describe what's the cause, what's the event, and what are the consequences. Usually the consequences, what are we talking about? Of course, we're talking about our triple constraints, our scope, our cost or resources, and our time. You can also talk about other consequences depending on the nature of your project that you might want to consider. Okay, so we've done our risk. We're not going to go into this in this short training. We're not going to talk about analysis and prioritization. We'll save that for the full-length course. But we can then prioritize them based on our low, medium, high probability and impact. We want to think about those that are high probability, high impact. And those are the ones we want to deal with. And so what can our responses to risk be, right? So for threats, we have basically 4 responses. We can avoid, we can transfer, we can mitigate, or we can accept. Avoid means basically change our project objectives, change our plan in a major way. Transfer usually means third party, right? So contract out some of the work. Mitigation means do something now to reduce the probability and or the impact of the future event. And acceptance means, well, it's not so serious. I'm not going to do anything about it now. That's passive acceptance. Active acceptance is, well, I'll have a contingency plan. I'll have a contingency plan. But I really don't do anything unless and until it happens. So let me give you an example of how we could think about these. And we really do need to think about all the possible ways of dealing with a threat or an opportunity when we're talking about our risk responses. So I'm planning a trip later this year. It may or may not occur, but I'm planning a trip to go to Sydney, Australia. And one of the things that I want to do when I'm in Sydney is go swimming at Bondi Beach. But there's a risk associated with swimming at the beaches in Australia. What is that? Well, many people would say sharks. Well, sharks is not a risk, right? It's not a threat. It might even be an opportunity, right, for shark's fin to make shark's fin soup, although maybe not much of an opportunity for the shark. No, we want to use that structure, the if-then resulting in. So if I go swimming, I might get attacked by a shark, resulting in severe bodily injury or death. Okay, now I've defined my risk event. Now I can start talking about the risk responses. How might I deal with that? So how could I avoid it? Don't go swimming. Or don't go swimming at Bondi Beach, swim in the hotel swimming pool. Okay? Avoid the threat. I could transfer the threat. I could bring one of you along with me and have you go swimming and watch you get eaten by a shark. And oh no, that would make me feel bad. Yeah. So we could transfer the risk, or we could mitigate the risk. When I do travel, I often will watch on the hotel television. I'll watch nature shows, right? National Geographic or whatever, Animal Kingdom, and there's always a show about sharks. There's something about sharks that really gets to us as a species. And usually when they're filming these sharks, they're in a shark cage, right, over the side of a boat, and the bars prevent the shark from attacking them. I saw in this one episode where they were swimming with the sharks, and these weren't, they weren't the great white sharks, but they were gray reef sharks, which are pretty nasty guys. You really don't want to mix it up with them. But they were wearing stainless steel mesh suits, like chainmail that knights would wear. So I could wear stainless steel mesh when I go swimming. Now, what would that mitigate? Probability or impact? Yeah, it would mitigate the impact. So if I did get bitten by a shark, it wouldn't take my arm off. It might just, give me a big bruise or perhaps break a bone, but I wouldn't lose my arm. So I'm reducing the impact. However, and this is something we've always got to be aware of, sometimes our risk response can be worse than the risk, right? So if I were to wear a stainless steel mesh suit and go swimming, I would create a new threat, wouldn't I? Yeah, I could drown, right? No, not a good thing, not a good thing. So we'll think about that. Okay, what about another mitigation strategy? Usually at the beaches in Australia, they put out shark nets. And these are steel cables that are sort of woven together right? Hopefully they go all the way to the bottom and there's no holes in them. And this keeps the sharks out, right? So this mitigates by reducing probability. And usually the sharks aren't like Free Willy and can jump over the net, right? So I could go swimming in an area where they have a shark net. That's another possible risk response strategy. What about acceptance? Well, you know, if you think about it, you look at the statistics, there really aren't that many shark attacks. It's really a very low probability. However, the impact is quite significant. But you know, maybe I'll just risk it. I'll have a contingency plan. I'll swim close to a hospital. All right, so now I want to review all of my risk response strategies. Don't go swimming at Bondi Beach, swim at the hotel pool. I'd really like to go to the beach. Have one of you come along and I'll watch you get eaten by a shark. No, that's not really a good idea. Wear a stainless steel mesh suit and go swimming. That's a really bad idea. Swim inside a shark net. Yeah, I still get the beach experience. I get to swim in the salt water. Probably better than just, with a acceptance criteria of not worrying about it. I think I'll choose that one. But I've gone through an analysis, if you would, of all the possible responses I can use to have that. The response strategies for opportunities are sort of just the opposite of the response strategies for threats. So rather than avoid an opportunity like we would a threat, we want to exploit it. It's such a good opportunity that we're going to make it part of our project objectives, and we're going to make sure it happens. Rather than transfer a threat to a third party through a subcontract or perhaps insurance, we might say, well, yeah, this is good, but we can't do it alone, so we're going to share it. And often joint ventures are a way of sharing opportunities. And the opposite of mitigate, which is, remember, reducing the probability or impact, is to enhance. If it's an opportunity that would be beneficial, we want to do things that might make it more likely to occur or make it a larger impact should it occur. And just like with threats, we can have acceptance, right? We can say passive or active, either, yeah, if it happens, good, if it doesn't happen, never mind, or if it does happen, then we'll do this in order to capture it. And do remember, for both our opportunities and our threats, right, for those that we haven't chosen one of the other three strategies, either for threats, avoid, transfer, or mitigate, or for the opportunities, exploit, share, or enhance, by default, we've accepted those. Right? And whatever we're doing, whether we're dealing with the threats or the opportunities, of course, we want to record the information into our risk register. And we want to even record those strategies that we thought of that we didn't choose to use. Why? Why is that useful? Well, maybe on another project, the circumstances may be different, and the strategy that we had considered might work better the next time. And the one that we did choose might not be as appropriate. So if we have a record of what we thought about, we don't have to sort of reinvent the wheel each time. This is how we deal with risk. We will be offering much more intensive, more in-depth courses, including a much more in-depth course on risk management, where we get into a lot more of the tools and techniques and how they're used, as well as a bit of the theory. So I want to thank you all. And if you do have any questions or comments, please send them to the email link below. And thank you.